I'm I'm really, really fortunate to have landed in a place like this.
Welcome to the fourth installment of the Grip Lab, the official podcast for Grip Studio. Grip Studio is your favorite mobile marketplace for health and fitness services. Physical health is not the only thing that we care about over here, so stick around to get an inside scoop on the benefits of therapy and how one person is using music to create a powerful experience.
Well, I'm super excited to be sitting down with licensed professional counselor and creator of Two Turntables, Paul Dang. Two Turntables provides a unique combination of psychotherapy, talk therapy, and
DJ.
DJing. Mr. Paul, thank you for the time today.
Appreciate it, my pleasure.
First and foremost, what inspired you to combine psychotherapy with DJing?
Yeah, I think it all started back a good 13, 14 years ago. At that time in my life, I felt like I was in this sort of fork in the road. And I was going to grad school for counseling psychology. And at that moment, I was actually taking this class called play therapy. And play therapy is a practice and an approach in terms of doing mental health, where the usage of toys or things that allow you to be engaged in a playful way can help children and individuals express themselves through feelings and emotions. So I was in this class, and I think it was one day where I was kind of like daydreaming a bit. And that sort of thought in my head, like, okay, like, should I be doing this thing called, being, in the world of mental health, or I could go into this, the world of DJing and do it professionally. I felt like I was very competent and able to do that. And I think it was through not just that day, but through the culmination of taking this class called play therapy, that at that given moment where I thought like I was at this fork in the road in my life, that I started to kind of think about, hey, what if utilizing these turntables and this DJ equipment as a tool, and being able to have this background in counseling psychology to basically create this idea of making DJing a therapeutic experience. So at some point, that fork in the road started to turn inwards. It became an intersection, right? And so there was that aha moment that I had, that in the course of the next 13 some years, I kept my head down and just focused on this kind of idea, quietly, and just, putting things together and ideas together. But even more importantly, the next many years was to focus on me becoming a very good, therapist. Mm-hmm. And so the rest is history.
I know that class brought that idea together. Was there any pivotal moment that made you realize the therapeutic power of music to help you pursue Two Turntables?
Yeah, as a DJ, like if you are fortunate and blessed to be able to have a gig and go out and play music out into the public, I think a really good DJ is very aware and intuitive to kind of recognize how other people are responding or reacting to your music, right, that you're playing. So over the years of playing out, you get to start understanding the effect that it has on people, just on the literal level of the impact of how music being played out in speakers creates this sort of effect for people. So I always call DJs on one end the masters of shifting the mood. So you could start off a song, very somber, and then if you tap into sort of bring people's attention to what you play a little bit, mm-hmm. and enough where you start creating this sort of mood and then building the story over the course of a night, then you could literally take anybody who may not think that they like this kind of music to get on the dance floor and start moving, right? So the call and response sort of effect of what you play and what you project then has that sort of a effect or sometimes a gradual or immediate effect to the audience. And so this is when you start to see and recognize that, okay, this is powerful, right? This is powerful in many ways. Not only can it help you, impact you in terms of your mood to go from something, again, low to something very high, or even on many levels, get you to literally move your physical body.
How does that music move so many people from different backgrounds and different moods, different experiences at the same time, Ben? That's just...
Yeah, and I think it goes back to the idea that music is the universal language, right? I call it one of the best languages human beings could, receive and interpret. And so I don't think there's necessarily a quantitative sort of value, like how do we describe why music hits the way it does, but it simply just does. It says things that words can't explain. And so there's reasons that even go in terms of, say, vibration and sound and frequencies that like hit people in a certain specific way. So there are a lot of different things I think that can add to it, but the way I often would explain it is that you don't try to explain it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's just like you either you feel it or you don't.
Yeah. That's a kind of binary almost.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are your main goals for blending these practices?
So, to point it out simply, it is to create a therapeutic value mentally, emotionally, for you. Having to work as a therapist, a mental health therapist for years now, I see the value and the importance of the dialogue, of the conversation, and it shows through the impact that it has on at this point, thousands of patients that I work with. The blending of music and DJing on the surface level can be just literally just a nice recreational activity, right? And but then when you get into the depth of learning how to DJ, a lot of things show up for people. And it happens in a lot of times through mistakes, and it occurs through also the growth. So as a therapist, I'm very sort of aware of how you might be behaving or thinking in the act and learning, in the process of learning. So I often think that utilizing these two separate things is like a 1-2 punch, if you will, that can be really helpful therapeutically.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. 1-2 punch. How many punches can you throw as a black belt?
That's a good question you say. The way I'll answer that is it's not so much of the frequency, but it's how the quality of how
fair.
you punch or you kick.
That's fair. I did it in my younger years. I wish I would have kept up with it.
Yeah.
But,
I studied martial arts for many years as well. And with being able to create a good punch or a kick is, I think, the constant repetition of it, right?
Yeah.
That's how you get better.
Yeah, that practice. How do you hope clients feel after engaging in your programs?
Yeah, good question. In the early stages of being a therapist, when I actually became a licensed therapist, I started working in addictions, counseling,
Okay.
and drug abuse and addictions. And I said to myself that when I became a therapist that I wanted to work in some of the most difficult and challenging populations. And on the top a lot of times is in the world of addiction. And I remember working in an inpatient facility where I would do group therapy, group counseling with a lot of the patients and residents. And the thing that I would say at times with either new patients or patients that were finishing the program, I would often say that, you take your grievances, your pain, your hurt, your memories, your thoughts, negative thoughts, and you purge and you place them here. And when you leave one day, you bury it here. So that idea or that thing that I would say to those patients back then still applies to this day. And it's that notion that you bring forth things that have been maybe clouding or affecting or creating this sort of hostage in your mind, and you let them go. So my hope for any patient or student of mine that comes in here is to feel a little bit lighter each time they come in here. And so that they don't have to carry the burden of those things that have been sort of mentally and emotionally affected them.
What actions can people take to let that go, or what do you do to, enhance that ability for somebody to let go?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think from the counseling side of it, it stems back to the idea of the dialogue, of the idea of the intentional conversation, the idea of the uncomfortable conversation, bringing forth the topics and things that you see that could be affecting an individual. I believe that there's a literal, a literal effect, a healing and even a redemptive effect of just to literally vocalize and talk out loud. And that in itself can be very freeing, because so much of what we might be thinking or feeling has been repressed or suppressed for so long, right? So I create and try to cultivate a space for you to feel comfortable to talk about this piece of information or this memory, and to place it on a table, and for us to break bread and have a conversation about it, and go through what therapists talk about, which is processing, to help in not only destigmatizing the thing that has been affecting you, but to also humanize it as well, right? Like we can have a conversation about something that hurts you into a thing that becomes the thing that no longer, holds you captive. So over time, I think the journey of literally having these kinds of conversations becomes so comfortable and allows you to free yourself in certain ways from those things that have been maybe haunting you forever. Now, on the end of, creating the freeing side of DJing, I think there's a very liberating thing about having autonomy, right? So to be able to say, you know what, here, I want you to play some of your songs, and to allow yourself to be able to comfortably play and to just get into the act of playing, right? That in itself, I think, can be very freeing. And so I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, I think there are, like you mentioned, that autonomy. There's some parallels there that may help bring that conversation,
for sure,
that dialogue open. You talked about earlier in your career that you focused on folks that with addiction problems. Right now, are there any particular mental health challenges or communities that you're passionate about supporting?
Yeah, I'm trained in doing trauma, PTSD, depression, anxiety, stress, addiction, sleep issues, relationship issues, like you name it. I would say the only one that I don't think that I'm quite ready or proficient enough is just like in the aspect of like ADHD and autism spectrum. But I'm fascinated by it, and I want to learn more. But those ones that I did name tend to be kind of that cover quite a bit. But I would say that of the specific ones I tend to see a lot is a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, and a lot of trauma.
Well, I think that this space is incredible, by the way. You've mentioned that environment can be a significant component to a therapeutic experience. What did it take to get to this point, and what can you do as an individual to create similar environments for ourselves?
Yeah, great question again. I think of it a lot of ways like a sculptor. And it's this idea that you amass like this big chunk of clay, and you essentially build it up to break it down to its bare essentials. So I don't necessarily expect people to subscribe to this approach in the sense of where I spent a lot of time in this empty space and kind of thinking about how am I going to build this the way it needs to be. So there was a lot of contemplation. There's a lot of thinking. There's a lot of the strange period where I'll just literally sit in this space, this empty space for hours thinking about, okay, let's try this. So there was a lot of kind of throwing darts against the board and seeing what sticks. And so I initially, Kyle, thought, okay, let me create this into this crazy futuristic but yet traditional old school karate dojo, right? And I tried that. I did a couple things. I said, this doesn't work, right? So I scrapped that. But to build off of that, though, I still wanted to kind of create this essence of something that is not only, in a sense, traditional, but then a little bit futuristic and sleek. So if there was a basis or a foundation to how I wanted to approach it moving forward, was to create a minimalistic look and appeal to it. And I started to kind of arrange things in a way where it creates space, and that was a lot of times inspired by friends of mine who were just straight hoarders, right? I mean, especially as if you ever get to know a DJ, especially like an old school DJ, he might have amassed this enormous record collection and there's no organization to it.
No.
And so I have friends back in Pittsburgh that they know who I'm talking about, and they're just like, oh my goodness. And so when I saw so much stuff everywhere, that was so busy in my head, right? It almost gave me a headache sometimes being around a place like that. And so what's the how do you unbusy ourselves? Well, let's take away, right? Let's minimize. And the more that I was able to kind of keep things to a minimal, that you start to feel like, okay, it's starting to free your mind a little bit. It's easier in the eyes, obviously, right? So now, if I were to recommend sort of a direction for your own space for that, I'd say get a book on Feng Shui.
Okay.
Right? Feng Shui is an ancient Chinese practice that encourages people to place things and arrange things in a way to create harmony and balance and just good energy in the space. So I would say that would be a really good step.
One thing that stood out to me that I'll never forget is not to sit with an open space behind you was one of the techniques. It was very interesting and it blew my mind that there's intention where you're going to sit, where you put your furniture.
Yeah. I mean, think about it, right? We're in literally a shipping container.
Yeah.
Right?
You'd never know if you sat inside here and never walked outside.
Yeah, you'd never know you're a shipping container. And I know for some people, shipping containers may feel a little bit kind of claustrophobic, right? But I really focus on the idea to minimize things in order for you to feel comfortable. And whether I'm 5'9", or for somebody it might be 6'1", 6'2", 6'3", and I've asked quite a few about how do you feel being in this place? Do you feel tight? Do you feel contained? And they're like, no, not really.
I can do jumping jacks in here.
Yeah.
Well, I know feng shui was one thing that you mentioned, but how do you balance and create a safe space while also keeping it engaging and dynamic?
Yeah, great question. There's two parts to it, which actually is reflective of how I approach the program.
Okay.
Right. The first step is, well, the program is each session is broken in two parts. The first part is the counseling part. It's the mental health therapeutic part. So as I mentioned, I'm a counselor, so the intention is to have the dialogue, the important conversation, right? And in that process, especially in the beginning, you want to build rapport with your patient or your student. So to me, it happens best when you can have that conversation. But it has to start with also how you present yourself. So you have to be authentic, you have to be sincere, you have to show empathy, you have to show compassion. You have to express things where the student or the patient is recognizing that I'm not judging you, right? So when you have these kinds of conversations, which over time builds the rapport, then what I have seen is that patients begin to start, putting their guard down, right? So it's cultivating the kind of rapport where you start to disarm the individual. That's when they start feeling more comfortable, right? And then over time, the conversations get deeper, and they allow for further discussion. The other side of it is through DJing, right? Like the literal act, the engaging side of DJing, right? So we switch gears into turning into this practice and this program where I say, hey, let's get on the turntables. Let's get you to start moving, right? When I work with a lot of patients who have, say, depression symptoms, though, when I would see patients in the office at times who I first meet, they often appear to be very sort of down, their head is down, they're kind of slumped over, right? And at times when I notice that from the gate, I say, you know what, you and I, let's go take a walk, right? Let's literally get yourself to move your body, because a lot of the things that you see from people who are very depressed is that they could be very non-active. They may be isolating themselves. They may not be as motivated. There's very low energy. So to translate that into this recreational act of playing on turntables and moving the body, and to play music that has a certain kind of effect to it, then you are literally getting somebody to engage in the work of play, right? And so there's that sort of yin and yang side of it, right? We sit down, we're static, we're having a conversation, and then it turns over to, okay, let's get your hands busy. I want you, don't be afraid to touch these records. Don't be afraid to even think that you're going to scratch or ruin the record. Come on, let's move, right? So that's how I describe it.
You've walked us through a few of the dynamics of the sessions that you have. Can you walk us through a little bit deeper about the sessions that you offer?
Yeah. So each session is 52 minutes long, and it's split up halfway with two things, right? Which is, again, the psychotherapeutic side of having the conversation, right? The counseling side of it, where you fuse various different approaches based upon the diagnosis, and you have conversations about them. So if it's about trauma, if it's about depression, anxiety, so on and so forth, you tailor-make the conversation towards the condition or the situation, right? So the first half tends to be about, the intentional conversation, and to bring forth not only the talk, but also coping skills, coping strategies, but furthering, the work of cognitive behavior therapy, of person-centered approaches to the conversation, so that allows for the patient to get a real stronghold on what mental health and what actually psychotherapy is about, right? So it's a lot of the work that I would normally do as a therapist, right? And then that half ends, right? And then we get into the hands-on practice of learning DJing. Now, there's a laid out curriculum that I also can tailor make, where I will get into the lesson itself, but then add some sprinkles to things that maybe pertain to the person's situation, right? So, for example, somebody who might be feeling a little bit anxious or nervous, who has social anxiety or so, one of the first lessons that I teach is about connection, right? So I will literally get the patient or the student to get on the turntables, but to detach everything from the equipment so that they learn how to tie in and connect things, right? And I stress the importance of connection, like the idea that you are this system that have these moving parts to it. Now, sometimes we might like have a loose gear or something disconnects. And when one gear kind of falls off, a lot of things can kind of fall off as well, right? So you stress the importance of like, don't isolate yourself, right? Like everything's interconnected. So if you take one piece of this, of equipment off, then you don't have this working.
Yeah.
Right? So I use sort of lessons or metaphors as almost like life skills as well. So that act of doing, connecting, a lot of times some of my teaching is very nonverbal. So I don't say things so much. I get them to pay attention to what I'm doing, and then, okay, go ahead and repeat that. I want you to do it now. So it allows people to kind of like quietly do something. And again, just be very playful and just curious,
Yeah.
right? If you make a mistake, make a mistake, right? If you didn't plug it into the right port, then that's okay, right? But it's to get you to be engaged, but then I'll tailor make the actual DJ lessons, again, based upon what I'm seeing of your condition.
You mentioned conditions, diagnosis, situations. How much of that is maybe self-diagnosed from somebody that comes in, or is that something that you address during the conversation? What does that typically look like from your side of things?
Yeah. I know we live in a world now where we can WebMD something or and especially if you go down that rabbit hole, like you could literally think that, okay, I got a scratch on my hand and literally believe that you have cancer, right? I tend to kind of discourage people to self-diagnose themselves because it can actually increase somebody's anxiety and stress, right? So a lot of times in the very beginning, we go through, I provide assessments, like literal, like psychological evidence-based assessments for the patient student to fill out.
Okay.
Right? And these measure anxiety, they can measure depression, they can measure trauma, so on and so forth. I take that information that the student or the patient was able to provide, and then to start building off of that. And I don't say that you immediately have this and that, but to be able to kind of get a good gist and to get a fuller picture of what may be going on. And then over time, start seeing where some of those kind of symptoms like sort of, connect or tie in. So that's usually in the very beginning of before we even start a first lesson,
Okay.
is to gather data.
How do you tailor music experiences to support individual mental health needs?
Yeah, music is powerful in many different ways, but some specific ways I think that it can be very impactful is that music can certainly create and conjure a memory, right? So if I get a student or a patient to say, you know what, pick me a song from your experience, from how you understand music that tells the story of when maybe you're 17 years old and you were assaulted, or give me something that gets you to remember that friend of yours that passed away. So music can be that foot in the door for further conversation, right? Because I do believe a lot of times like music can be that metaphor to our lives, right?
Absolutely.
The soundtrack to your life, if you will,
Yeah.
right? So you could take what you understand and what you relate to with music and bring forth a conversation about it, right? So it can create a memory. And we all think about that song that we once heard or we first heard, or some song that had such a profound effect for us for that period of time. So there's so many ways you can go with it, just based on the fact of it can create a memory. Now, the other side of it too is that music can create an emotional effect, right? It can evoke an emotion. So give me a song that makes you feel very sad. How about play a song that makes you feel very happy? How about a song that makes you feel very angry, right? And so you can allow for a song to create and conjure that emotion, right? So then there in itself can bring up a lot of interesting conversations about our emotions, right? And through that, you can really have some really powerful dialogue.
I'm curious, if someone shows you a song you're not familiar, is it harder for you to assess what's going on?
Yeah, you can ask them, right?
Yeah, great point. You can ask.
Yeah, you can ask, right? And it's a good question though, because
Yeah.
we all kinds of music is subjective, right?
Certainly.
We can it's really interesting though is that, and I know a lot of DJs can attest to this too, is that I've been guilty of it, where I'll come in and I'll hear a song that I might have heard on the radio that I said, I don't like this song at all, right? For whatever reason that night or that situation, that song that you disliked or just didn't have any feel to it, all of a sudden became, wow, that's an amazing song. And I couldn't put my finger on as to why, but I would dare to say that when you can create an experience, whether that's at a bar or even on a dance floor, like that thing that you didn't think that you'd like, actually you find yourself, hey, that's my jam now, right? So there can be many different ways, but I think the way that you for me as a therapist is like, yeah, like how do you feel? What did you get out of that song, right? So that's where I'd probably start.
Do you draw from specific therapeutic frameworks or musical styles in your program?
Yeah, I think the background as a therapist, like I do like evidence-based practices in psychology, like cognitive behavior therapy. That's the practice or the modality that helps you understand that your thoughts guide the way that your emotions are, which then leads to how you behave, right? And so the work is being able to identify your irrational thoughts and to recognize that these irrational thoughts is impacting you behaviorally. So this is a cognitive behavior therapy has been kind of a really powerful tool and a technique to help people understand their relationships with what they may be thinking about or even what they're believing. So I utilize that as a hallmark, as an important approach. But I'll tell you this as well though, that a lot of therapists have a much more holistic approach to things, and I do as well. So I draw in aspects of not just cognitive behavior therapy, but also things like mindfulness meditation, being able to utilize even some Eastern philosophy, like Tao Te Ching, even Buddhist philosophies, as sort of like this everything but the kitchen sink approach to things, right? But to really base it off of like some of my work in counseling psychology, I will say things like behavior modification, cognitive behavior therapy, person-centered approaches have been really helpful for me and useful for the patient. Now, in the first many sessions, I may get into presenting things out of my own archive of music, right? But I believe that that's useful, which can bring out a lot of different things in conversation, because I will talk about certain artists, and there's interesting stories about the artist, right? And I may bring the idea of an artist and the story of an artist to tell the story of what they may be going through. But ultimately, as you progress in the program, it's not really so important what I think is good, right, or important, but it's really about your personal relationship with music, right? So this is why I think autonomy is so important. Like, I want you to think about your music, the things that you like, the things that you love with music, and let's see how you can express yourself musically through the music that you really love and enjoy, right? So the program does orientate itself into the things that I present, but then ultimately it is for you to choose, right? Because again, I believe that, there's a real liberating thing about being able to choose, right? And to have that choice. People who go through mental and emotional distress, a lot of times, they may feel like they don't have control over things, right? They don't have control of their emotions. They don't have control of their feelings. They don't have control over their thoughts. They don't have control of their life, right? But for these 52 minutes of coming in here and you getting this ability to kind of be yourself, to be able to play your music, right? To have that ability to choose, right? Then it's kind of bringing back this sense of autonomy, and even over time, self-efficacy, right? So now, what may have started me presenting music begins to evolve into you to choose the music that you love and enjoy, and then the final session, the 10th session or what have you, will record a mix of yours that tells your life story.
That's cool.
So from being able to introduce concepts and foundations to DJing, to presenting certain stories, unique stories of artists that I'll bring forth, then to have you start selecting and choosing music. Because I believe that 50-60% of being a DJ is about being able to know your music. So you gotta have that part of choosing. So then that becomes a way you begin to articulate and express yourself musically through music, so that you can tell your story.
I like that a lot. Giving your own soundtrack,
Sure.
that's so powerful for some people.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah. A lot of times, a DJ, the mix, when I like to kind of think about when I ever play out as this one long extended song, right? So I want to take you on a story. Music can create a sense of a story. Human beings, of all creatures on this earth, we tend to be storytellers. All of us are, whether we realize it or not, right? Some choose to express it. Some choose to live it out in their own way, right? But at times we define ourselves through our story. So let's do it through a musical way.
Universal language, right?
Yes, sir.
In your experience, how does music impact mental health on both the conscious and subconscious levels?
Yeah, I think to root it back, I think to the idea that music can evoke an emotion, music can create a memory, music can literally move your body. There's so many qualitative value when you can recognize it for those, say, three things, right? So the effect of how music from a sound level can set the mood or create the feeling, right? And like I said earlier, that the power of a DJ is to kind of learn how to shift your mood from something sad or somber to something uplifting, inspiring. And you can literally do that if you're good and you're tactful, to do that literally from one song to the next, right? So on the other end, music creates the memory. So we can have some really powerful discussions, psychotherapeutically, through being able to bring up something that starts with a song that gets you to think about something about a past, and allow for your past to be the thing that we put a spotlight on, and let's kind of talk about it, right? The literal thing about music that can move the body. You can literally dance if you want to, or you can bob your head. And like I was mentioning, sometimes we need a little bit of movement, right? We benefit from, as you know, right? Even just from exercise. If you might be clocking out on the end of the day of a job, and you decide to go jump into the gym, and then you find yourself catching your second wind. Right? It's like, man, I feel really refreshed, right? Now, I'm not saying that you're going to come in here and sweat, but let's see how this idea of music can get you to move, right? So there's a lot of value to it.
Are you able to share any example where music impacted a patient's mental well-being?
Yeah. Here's an example, and this goes to boys and men. A lot of times, us as men grow up, or boys growing up, we're taught to kind of keep things inside, to bottle up, right? Showing a sense of our emotions is a sign of weakness, right? And however we were taught those things in this ethos of life, that we were boys don't cry, right? And there's something I think really unfortunate about that. Is because to deny ourselves of how we are feeling about something, to me, I think is denying our sense of humanity. So there have been conversations through sometimes playing music that brings up some kind of uncomfortable memory, or just this thought or feeling that allows for, again, creating and cultivating the proper environment, a therapeutic, safe, and comfortable and secure environment that allows for a man or a boy to sit here and just literally like playing a song can cause people to welt in their eyes, right? And you can kind of sense and feel that they haven't done this, right? And you don't, as a therapist, you don't judge them, right? And you allow them to be in this place. It can be a very releasing, it can be a very cathartic thing. And it's not to say that is a weakness. No, that's welcomed here. In fact, that's probably what's needed, right? We're as men, like, we store so much inside of ourselves. We compartmentalize so many things inside of ourselves. And why? Why are we holding that in? Because I work with people in anger management. And one of the biggest struggles is for allow them to be, expressive, emotionally, right? So it's a very powerful thing when you can allow for someone to feel vulnerable, especially even working with patients in trauma, is that there's so much suppression and repression. Because of that memory, it hurts so much that we avoid it. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to think about it. But that's actually the thing that we need to channel out of ourselves. There's so much stored trauma energy inside. So we got to find a way to kind of let that out. And I believe sometimes music can be a part of that process.
Have you found any challenges that you've faced during merging psychotherapy and DJing?
I think that was a lot in my head at first. Well, I DJ, and I'm a therapist, and I've always wondered if people could make that connection and how that can be therapeutic, until I started to ask people, hey, I'm like friends and stuff like that, and they'll pause for a minute, and they'll go like, dude, you got something, that makes perfect sense. And so they could see what I'm saying. So the challenge was really about will the wider audience or an audience actually be receptive to the idea of seeing DJing and make that connection with psychology and counseling. And the more that I kind of quietly started to understand about my background in doing mental health, but also doing my own personal research on music and music therapy, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I think you have an awesome concept, awesome programs, and what better person to facilitate it than you? So.
Thanks, Kyle.
I know that we've talked a lot about your clients and about their preferences, but do you have any genres or artists that personally resonate with you when you need to reset or heal?
Yeah, this question is a really good one. I think it depends on the day sometimes, because who doesn't have music that has influenced them or artists that influenced them? But I remember kind of thinking this to myself many times and asking that kind of question. So I phrase it in the question in a way where, imagine if you were on a deserted island and you only had but a few records that you could bring with you, right?
If only.
And yeah, if only. And the two that stick out with me is, like, I'm a jazz cat. Like, I love jazz music. Amongst a lot of other genres of music, I find that jazz music really captures my mind and my heart and my spirit. So the two artists and the two albums that I'd say that I would bring with me at times would be, number one, John Coltrane's A Love Supreme. Number two is Miles Davis, A Kind of Blue. And why I choose those albums is that it's no disrespect to, say, music that's, say, syncopated or beat oriented, but there's a little bit of a confinement to the idea of a beat because it just repeats itself. Where something like a genre of jazz, for instance, especially with specific artists, there's something very freeing in that music where you could hear this song that's, like, say, 9 or 10 minutes long. You hear it that one time, and then the next day you might hear something completely different out of it the next time. So it never feels as if, like, it's repetitive to you, because you seem to kind of get something out of it every time. Like, you could pay attention to the horn player, or you could pay attention one day to the drum player, or you can hear what the bassist is playing. So there's the uniqueness of being able to kind of extrapolate or get something out of it through an instrumentalist in the band, or take it for its totality.
Yeah.
But still hear something completely different every time. So those are the two albums and artists that I would probably choose.
Those are the ones, huh?
Yeah.
If only we're stranded on an island. Is there a good place that you refer people that are interested in Two Turntables? Yeah,
check out the website, 2 Turntables, TURNTABLES.org. That's all one word, 2turntables.org. You can check me out on also Instagram, the 2 Turntables, and you can find me there as well.
Well, thank you for letting us turn the tables on you and you be the subject matter this morning.
Nice, I like that. It's been my pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming here and bringing these great questions.
Learn more about Paul and Two Turntables on the Grip Studio app. Newest update 3.06 is out now for all devices. What else could you possibly want? A free download? Consider it done.